The wind carried the smell of rain and gunpowder that evening, a mix that made every living soul in Dry Creek uneasy. The clouds rolled over the horizon like bruised flesh, purple and swollen, ready to split open. Margaret Maggie Callahan stood on the porch of her small ranch house, her husband's old rifle resting against the doorframe. She'd buried Tom Callahan 3 winters ago, after a fever took him faster than she could fetch the doctor. Since then, the ranch had gone quiet. Just the creak of the windmill, the cry of coyotes, and her own voice when she prayed aloud to keep herself from feeling completely alone. Most women her age had gone back east or remarried, but Maggie had stayed, because that's what frontier wives did. They stayed with the land, even when the land no longer wanted them. The first crack of lightning tore across the desert sky, illuminating the line of mountains that split the world in two, the white men's land, and Apache territory. She heard it then, faint, almost lost beneath the rumble of thunder. A sound that didn't belong to wind or rain, a cry, human, weak. Her hand went to the rifle before her mind even caught up. She stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the damp sand, and listened again. The cry came once more, from somewhere near the canyon that cut behind her property. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, grabbing her oil lamp and heading out into the coming storm. The desert came alive as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then fierce, pounding the dry ground like drums. Maggie moved through it, the lamp's light shaking in her hand. She had no reason to believe it was anything but trouble. Travelers got lost, drifters turned desperate, and not all of them came begging for help. But something about that cry twisted her heart in a way she couldn't ignore. She found her way down the rocky trail. The mud slicked beneath her boots and nearly slipped when she saw it, a small figure lying against the rocks, wrapped in torn animal hide. When she knelt, the lamplight revealed a woman, Apache, barely breathing, face pale under streaks of mud and blood. Her eyes fluttered open, catching Maggie's, and in her arms a newborn. The baby's face was red and wet, lips trembling with tiny gasps for air. Maggie froze. Every story she'd ever heard in town rushed through her mind. Savages, raids, blood feuds. The men in Dry Creek had lost kin to Apache hands. There wasn't a soul in town who'd forgive her for touching one, let alone helping one. The Apache woman tried to speak. Her voice came like gravel, broken by pain. "Please, take her." Maggie's throat went dry. "I can't, they'll—" The woman gripped Maggie's wrist with surprising strength. "Please, she's all I have." A flash of lightning split the sky, and Maggie saw it clearly. The mother's side torn by a gunshot wound, the blood mixing with rainwater. She wasn't going to make it through the night. The baby began to cry again, loud, piercing, desperate. Maggie's breath caught. She looked around the dark canyon, at the lifeless world that would swallow this child in minutes if she turned away. Then she made the choice that would damn her in the eyes of the town, and define her name in the pages of its history. She pulled off her shawl, wrapped it around the baby, and whispered to the dying mother, "I'll take her." The woman's lips moved, maybe in gratitude, maybe in prayer, and then she went still. Thunder rolled over the canyon like the closing of a great door. Maggie stood alone in the storm, holding a crying newborn that belonged to the enemy, and the wind carried her whispered promise into the night. "I'll keep her safe, no matter what it costs." By morning the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean and silent. The light crawled over the horizon, turning the red dirt gold again, but Maggie Callahan felt none of that beauty. She hadn't slept. The tiny bundle she'd carried home now lay in her arms, wrapped in her old quilt beside the hearth. The baby's skin was warm again, her breathing steady, but the reality of what Maggie had done was beginning to set in. The mother hadn't survived the night. Maggie had gone back before dawn, shovel in hand, and buried the Apache woman in the canyon where she'd fallen. She hadn't dared mark the grave. No cross, no stones, nothing to catch the eye of passing men. The rain had covered most of her tracks, but guilt left its own kind of trail, and Maggie knew someone would follow it. When she returned to the house, she found herself staring at the baby longer than she meant to. The child's hair was black as soot, soft and damp. Her eyes, when they opened, were the color of river mud, dark, unreadable. There was something about her that silenced the room. Maggie had lost her own child years ago, long before Tom's fever took him, and in that silence she felt a familiar ache rise up like smoke from old ashes. She tried to steady herself. "You don't belong here," she whispered, pacing the floor. Not with me. Not with this town. But when the baby stirred, small fingers reaching toward her voice, Maggie's heart broke in two. She remembered the woman's final words. The way she'd held Maggie's wrist with that last burst of life. Please, she's all I have. The words echoed louder than reason. Maggie gathered the baby in her arms again, feeling the warmth against her chest. The decision had already been made. She was just catching up to it. She would feed her, keep her alive, and then she'd figure something out. Maybe take her east. Maybe find the tribe. Anything but let the men of Dry Creek know what she'd done. But secrets in a small frontier town had shorter lives than horses in a dust storm. By midday, a neighbor named Clyde Horton came riding up to her gate. He was a thick man, face burnt from years in the sun, with that suspicious squint every frontier man carried. Heard there was gunfire near your property last night, he said, dismounting. Storm was loud, but I thought I caught a few cracks. Maggie forced a smile. Storm threw down some thunder, that's all. Clyde tilted his head, listening past her shoulder. From inside the house came a faint whimper. The soft, high sound of an infant. Maggie's heart stopped. She coughed hard, stepped sideways to block the door. You got company? Clyde asked. Just a sick lamb I brought in, she lied. Lost its ma in the flood. He didn't look convinced. You best be careful, Maggie. Sheriff says there's been Apaches moving through again. Last thing you need is trouble knocking at your door. I can handle trouble, she said evenly. Clyde stared at her for another moment before spitting in the dirt and mounting up. You always could, he muttered, riding off toward town. When he was gone, Maggie closed the door and leaned against it, her breath shaking. The baby had fallen quiet again, staring up at her from the quilt, with eyes too knowing for someone only hours old. That night, as Maggie sat by the fire, she noticed something tucked inside the woman's torn animal hide, the one she'd brought back from the canyon, without realizing. It was a small leather pouch, hand-stitched, sealed with a strip of rawhide. She untied it and tipped it over the table. Out fell a piece of obsidian, a locket with strange carvings, and a folded scrap of hide with symbols painted in dried blood. It wasn't English. It wasn't a language she knew, but the markings looked like warnings. Circles and arrows crossed paths, a single handprint smeared over the edge. Maggie's hands trembled. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a dying mother's keepsake. The woman had been running from something. And now, by taking the baby, Maggie had inherited whatever hunted her. Outside, a coyote howled into the night. The baby stirred again, whimpering softly. Maggie held her close, the storm clouds gathering again in her chest. She whispered into the darkness, "What have I brought into my home?" For the next 3 days, Maggie barely left the house. The baby, whom she'd started calling Lena after her own stillborn daughter, cried through the nights and slept fitfully through the heat of day. Maggie fed her cow's milk by spoon, changed her rags and hummed old Irish lullabies she hadn't sung since before Tom died. Each note seemed to pull something from her chest she didn't know was still there. The air outside hung heavy with gossip. Dry Creek was the kind of town that measured decency by who showed up at church and who didn't. Maggie hadn't since Tom's funeral, which already made her a subject of quiet judgment. A widow who lived alone at the edge of Apache territory, that was enough to make her a mystery. But a cry in the night, that would make her a target. On the 4th morning, she wrapped Lena in a blanket and carried her to the barn. The air smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth. Her mare, Daisy, huffed softly when she saw the bundle, as if she too sensed the change in the house. Maggie had never spoken much to animals before, but now her voice filled the space because it had to. "You're safe here, little one," she whispered, rocking the child. "No one will hurt you. Not while I still draw breath." But the world had a cruel way of testing promises. By noon, she saw dust rising on the main road, 2 riders heading toward her ranch. One of them was Sheriff Amos Harlan, the other, Clyde Horton. Her stomach turned cold. Maggie set the baby down in a wicker basket by the fireplace, threw a rag over the top for shade, and stepped out to meet them before they could reach the porch. "Morning, Mrs. Callahan," Sheriff Harlan called, tipping his hat. He was a tall man with a jaw like a shovel and eyes that missed nothing. "Heard from Clyde here you might have seen something the night of the storm." "Just lightning and rain," Maggie said, keeping her tone calm. The sheriff dismounted, his spurs jingling. "We found tracks near the canyon, barefoot, small ones. Then more boot prints. Looked like a struggle, maybe. You sure you didn't see anyone? Her throat went dry. Not a soul. He studied her face. We think it was an Apache woman. One of the guards from Fort Mason says a group of them were ambushed near the ridge. Might have been one survivor. If she came this way, it'd be good to know. Maggie forced a shrug. No one came through here. I'd have heard. Clyde spat tobacco into the dirt. Could have been hiding from you, same as from us. You live close enough to their trails. The sheriff raised a hand to silence him, but his eyes stayed fixed on Maggie. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind picked up, tugging at the hem of her dress. Then, from inside the house, just barely, a sound broke the silence, a cry, high, sharp, alive. Maggie's blood turned to ice. Sheriff Harlan's brow furrowed. You got a baby in there? My cousin's, she said quickly. Passing through from Tucson. Left the little one here while she runs an errand to town. It was a bad lie, and everyone knew it. The sheriff's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, if that's the case, tell her to keep quiet about Apache tracks. Town's restless. You know how men get when they think trouble's close. Yes, Sheriff, she said softly. He nodded once, mounted up, and turned back down the trail. Clyde lingered a second longer, his gaze sharp as a knife. You keeping secrets out here, Maggie? She met his eyes. Only the ones that keep me alive. He smirked, then followed the sheriff toward town. When they disappeared into the haze, Maggie rushed back inside. Lena had quieted again, tiny chest rising and falling against the blanket. Maggie dropped to her knees beside the hearth, trembling. She'd been close, too close. The town was watching now, and once the men of Dry Creek started sniffing for something, they didn't stop until they dug it out with blood and fire. That night, Maggie sat by the window with her rifle across her knees, watching lightning flicker over the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, she knew, the Apache Mother's people might be searching. And in town, the sheriff was likely piecing together a story that would come straight to her door. Between those two worlds, Maggie Callahan stood alone, one hand rocking a child not her own, the other ready to defend her with everything she had left. And when dawn finally broke, the desert seemed to whisper her name in the wind. By the end of the week, Dry Creek was alive with talk. It started, as it always did, at Millie Carson's general store, where every can of coffee came with a side of rumor. Someone claimed they'd seen smoke from Maggie Callahan's chimney every hour of the night. Someone else swore they'd heard a baby crying clear from the road, even though Maggie hadn't had one in years. Then someone, likely Clyde Horton, said he'd found a small grave near the canyon after the storm, unmarked and freshly turned. That was all it took. By Sunday, every pew in the little clapboard church was filled with murmurs about that widow out by the ridge. Pastor Whitlock preached on sin and secrets, never naming names, but his eyes landed on Maggie's empty seat more than once. Maggie didn't go to church that morning. She sat on her porch instead, shelling peas into a tin bowl while Lena slept in the cradle she'd built from old fence boards. The air was bright and brittle, the kind of sunlight that revealed every crack in the land. From her porch, Maggie could see the town, a scatter of roofs and dust beyond the mesquite, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. The truth was, she could feel the walls closing in. The sheriff's visit, Clyde's stare, the way her supplies were late arriving from town, all of it spoke of what was coming. Folks out here didn't need proof to burn a person down. Suspicion was enough. That afternoon she heard wagon wheels crunch up her trail. She froze, hands stilling over the bowl. When she stepped out, she saw a familiar figure climbing down from a buckboard. Eleanor Tate, the doctor's wife, one of the few women in town who'd once called her friend. Maggie, Eleanor said softly, brushing dust from her dress. I came to see for myself. For yourself? Maggie asked. Eleanor's eyes softened. They're saying things, Maggie. Ugly things. That you buried an Indian out here. That you took her child. Maggie felt her stomach twist. You believe them? I don't know what to believe anymore, Eleanor said, stepping closer. But I do know this town. They'll turn on you faster than a snake in summer. If you're hiding something, you need to send it away. Send it away? Maggie's voice hardened. She's just a baby. Eleanor's face faltered. She? So it's true. The air between them went still. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Maggie said quietly, if you came here to tell me to do what they'd do, abandon an innocent child to the desert, then you best turn your wagon around. Eleanor looked down, torn between fear and sympathy. "You're not wrong, Maggie. But right don't always keep you alive." She climbed back onto her wagon and drove off without another word, her figure shrinking into the pale horizon until the dust swallowed her up. When Maggie went back inside, Lena was awake, small fists waving, mouth searching for warmth. Maggie sat beside the cradle and brushed her thumb across the baby's cheek. "They can whisper all they want," she murmured. "You're mine now. Let them try to take you." That night she lit no lamp. The house stayed dark, silent but for the baby's soft breathing. Out the window she saw torchlight flicker once on the far ridge, then vanish. It might have been hunters, or it might have been something else. Either way, Maggie kept her rifle loaded and her heart steady, because she knew the town wouldn't just whisper much longer. They'd come, and when they did, she would be ready. 2 days later, the sheriff came back. Maggie saw him long before he reached the porch, a black silhouette riding slow through the rising heat, his horse kicking up dust that hung in the still air. Sheriff Amos Harlan wasn't a cruel man by nature, but years on the frontier had stripped the softness from him. He believed in order, not kindness. And in a place like Dry Creek, order was often the crueler thing. He dismounted, tying his reins to her fence post. Maggie didn't bother to greet him. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, the rifle leaning by her side like a silent warning. "Morning, Maggie," he said, his voice dry as sandpaper. "You mind if I step inside?" "I do," she replied. "If you got something to say, you can say it from there." He looked her over, weary eyes, lined face, the weight of too many bad choices pressing on his shoulders. "Town's stirred up something fierce. Men saying you're keeping an Indian child out here. That true?" Maggie's jaw tightened. "Men say a lot of things when they don't have work to do." He sighed. "That ain't an answer. I don't owe you one." The sheriff stepped closer, boot heels sinking into the dirt. "You owe it to yourself, Maggie. This ain't the world it used to be. Folks in town are scared. You know what fear turns into out here." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "Fear didn't bury that woman. Men did. And now they want her child too." The sheriff's gaze flickered, a shadow of surprise, maybe even pity. But it passed. "If what I'm hearing's true, I can't protect you," he said. "You think I don't know what those men are like? You think I want to see them do something stupid? But they will. You're giving them a reason." She took a step forward, her voice low and sharp. "You ever think maybe I'm giving them a chance to remember they're still human?" The wind caught her hair, blew dust between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the sheriff said, softer now, "Maggie, listen to me. I don't care what you've done, but you can't keep that baby here. I'll give you until Sunday. Take her and ride east, or I'll have to come back with a warrant, and I can't promise I'll be the first one through your door." Maggie's throat burned. "And if I say no?" He met her eyes. "Then God help you." The words hung heavy in the heat. The sheriff turned, mounted his horse, and rode off the same way he came. The sound of his hooves faded into the desert, leaving only the creak of the windmill and the faint whimper of the baby from inside. Maggie sank down on the porch step, staring at the horizon. She knew he wasn't lying. By Sunday the town would come, with torches, ropes, or bullets. It didn't matter which. That night she sat beside the fire watching Lena sleep. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell, steady and innocent, unaware of the storm gathering beyond those wooden walls. Maggie thought about Tom, how he'd fought in the war, how he'd believed decency was worth dying for. She wondered what he'd say if he could see her now. Would he tell her to run or to stand? When she finally looked out the window, she saw something move in the darkness. A shadow among the rocks near the canyon. For a second, she thought it was her fear playing tricks on her. But then a flicker of light caught her eye, a glint of metal, or maybe a reflection of eyes watching her from the wild. She rose, gripping the rifle, every sense alive. If it was the sheriff's men, she'd be ready. If it was something else, some Apache, perhaps, then the past had come calling. Either way, Maggie Callahan had no intention of running, not anymore. The night came quiet and moonless, the kind of dark that swallowed everything whole. Maggie sat by the window, rifle across her knees, the baby asleep in a basket beside the fire. The air was thick with silence, too heavy to be natural. Even the coyotes had gone still. She'd known this moment was coming. She could feel it all afternoon in that charged stillness, the way the wind changed. She'd spent the day boarding the windows, stacking kindling near the hearth, and whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Then, somewhere near midnight, she heard it, hoofbeats, slow at first, then multiplying, a rhythm that sent her pulse racing. She blew out the lamp and crouched by the window. Out on the ridge, torches flickered through the darkness like fireflies, moving in a slow, deliberate line toward her ranch. 6, maybe 7 riders, men from Dry Creek. They came the way men do when they've already made up their minds. Steady, unhurried, sure of what they came to do. Maggie swallowed hard. Her palms were slick against the rifle stock. She peeked toward the baby. Lena stirred in her sleep but didn't cry. Thank God. The riders stopped at the gate. A voice she recognized called out, "Clyde Horton, Maggie Callahan. We ain't here to hurt you, but you open that door right now and hand over that child." His tone was too casual, too rehearsed, the sound of a man pretending he's not about to burn down a woman's home. Maggie didn't move. Clyde called again, louder this time. "That baby don't belong here. You know it, I know it. You're bringing trouble down on all of us. Give her up and this ends clean." Maggie raised the rifle and fired into the air. The sound ripped through the stillness like thunder. "Next shot won't be a warning," she shouted. "You take one more step toward my gate, and I'll start aiming for hearts." The horses spooked, stamping and snorting. For a moment, no one moved. Then another voice spoke. "Sheriff Harlan's, Maggie, it's me." His tone was steady, pained. "You don't want to do this. Just hand the child over. These men are scared. You can't fight them all. You think I care about their fear?" She called back. "I held that woman's hand while she died, Amos. She asked me to save her baby. And I will, even if it means facing every coward in this valley." Clyde spat in the dirt. "You're siding with murderers, with savages. I'm siding with what's right. Then you'll burn for it." He lit a torch and hurled it toward the porch. It landed against the steps, flames licking up the dry boards. Maggie didn't think. She fired again. The bullet struck the torch from his hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. The men ducked and cursed, shouting. Someone fired back, the bullet splintering the post beside her head. The baby began to cry, the sound piercing through the gunfire like a knife. Maggie dragged the basket behind the hearth, shielding Lena with her body. Smoke thickened. The men outside shouted for her to come out, but she didn't listen. She grabbed the old shotgun Tom had kept under the floorboards, double-barreled, heavy and deadly close range. When the first man tried to break through the door, she was waiting. The blast thundered through the house, the man's silhouette thrown back into the firelight. The others scattered, yelling her name, firing into the walls. Maggie reloaded, eyes burning, lungs full of smoke. "Go home," she shouted. "You'll not take her while I'm breathing." The shooting slowed. The men began to pull back, dragging the wounded. Clyde's voice came once more, bitter and trembling. "This ain't over, Maggie. You're as good as dead come morning." The hoofbeats retreated into the night, leaving only the hiss of dying flames and the baby's ragged cries. Maggie sank to her knees, coughing, trembling. The house smelled of gunpowder and smoke. Her arms ached, her ears rang, but Lena was alive, small, frightened, and clinging to her finger. Maggie pressed her lips to the child's forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered, though her voice broke on the lie because deep down she knew the truth. Tonight was only the beginning. The dawn came slow and grey, dragging its light over a ranch that no longer looked like home. The porch was scorched, the door scarred by bullets, and the smell of smoke clung to everything like a ghost. Maggie moved through the wreckage in silence, rifle in hand, baby strapped to her chest with a strip of cloth she hadn't slept. Every creak in the floorboards made her flinch. Every shadow on the horizon looked like riders coming back to finish what they started. But when the first real sound broke the silence, it didn't come from the road. It came from the canyon, a low whistle, like wind through bone. Then the soft thud of hooves moving with practiced quiet. Maggie froze by the window. She knew that rhythm. It wasn't white men's riding. It was Apache. Her blood ran cold. She stepped outside, keeping to the shadow of the porch, eyes scanning the ridge. The sun was climbing, and with it came the unmistakable figure. 3 riders, painted in ash and red earth, moving through the canyon brush with the patience of predators. For a moment she considered running. But where? The town would kill her for what she'd done, and the Apache might kill her for what she'd taken. Still, she didn't move. The riders stopped at the edge of her yard. The one in front dismounted. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face hard as carved stone. He carried a rifle slung across his back, but his hands were empty. His eyes fixed on the baby even before he looked at her. Maggie's voice caught. "She's alive," she said quietly. "Your woman asked me to save her." The man's expression didn't change. He stepped closer, slow and silent, studying Maggie's face like he was trying to read the truth behind it. Another rider, younger, pointed toward the grave in the canyon. He spoke in their language in a sharp, cutting sound. The tall man answered in the same tongue, then turned back to her. "She was my sister," he said in broken English. His voice was deep, careful. "You buried her?" "I did," Maggie said. "The storm came. She was dying when I found her. She made me promise to protect the child." He looked at the baby, who stirred under the cloth and whimpered softly. Maggie felt the man's pain like a weight in the air, heavy, unspoken. He nodded once. "The woman's name was Nalin. The child—" He paused, his voice tightening. "The child's name is Chenoa. It means white dove." Maggie's throat tightened. "She's beautiful." "I've been calling her Lena," he said nothing. His gaze moved toward the horizon, the direction of Dry Creek. "The men who killed her," he said, voice low. "They came from that town?" "Yes," his jaw flexed. "Then we will take back what is ours." "Wait," Maggie said, stepping forward. "You can't go there. They'll shoot on sight. They're already looking for an excuse to kill more of you." The Apache warrior's eyes burned with a grief that was older than hate. "Then they will have their reason." She moved closer, desperate now. "You think I don't want justice? I buried your sister with my own hands. But if you ride into that town, they'll slaughter every one of you, and the baby won't survive either. Please." He stared at her for a long time. The desert wind hissed between them, carrying the smell of dust and death. Finally, he said, "Why did you help her? You are not her kin. You are not of her blood." Maggie's voice broke. "Because I buried my own child once, and I swore I'd never let another one die if I could stop it." Something in his face softened. Not much, but enough. He looked again at the baby, who reached a tiny hand toward the light. After a moment, he nodded. "You are brave," he said quietly, "but brave does not stop bullets. We will come when the moon is full. If you still have the child, then we will take her. No harm will come to you." He turned to leave, mounting his horse. The others followed, vanishing into the canyons like smoke. Maggie stood frozen long after they were gone, the baby's warmth pressing against her heart. She knew the truth now. She was living on borrowed time. If the town didn't destroy her first, the Apache would return for what belonged to them. But as she looked out across the scorched land, a strange calm settled over her. She wasn't afraid anymore, because somewhere deep inside, Maggie Callahan had decided that when both worlds came knocking, she would stand between them. The sun rose red that morning, the kind of red that meant blood before dusk. Maggie Callahan woke before dawn and knew, in her bones, that the waiting was over. The air felt wrong, still, heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Lena Chenoa slept quietly against her chest as Maggie moved through the house one last time. The rifle was cleaned, the shotgun loaded, the baby's blanket tied snug beneath her chin. Outside, the windmill creaked, groaning like an old voice warning her to turn back. But there was no turning back now. She stepped out to the porch and saw the horizon move. Dust rising from the south, riders, the men from Dry Creek, at the same time. Far to the west, another line of figures appeared. Apache warriors on horseback, black silhouettes cresting the ridge with the morning sun at their backs. Two worlds, closing in, and in the middle stood one woman and a child who belonged to both. Maggie took a deep breath and whispered, "We stand our ground, little one. Whatever happens, we stand." By the time the sheriff's men reached her fence line, Clyde Horton was already shouting, "Maggie, you best hand over that baby right now. We ain't letting no Apache blood be raised under our roofs." Maggie raised her rifle, the barrel gleaming in the morning light. "You burned my porch once, Clyde. You come one step closer, I'll bury you in what's left of it." Behind Clyde, Sheriff Harlan rode slow, his face carved from stone. "Maggie, don't do this," he called. "You can't win." "I'm not trying to win," she said. "I'm trying to do what's right." The sheriff looked pained. "There's a difference between courage and suicide." Maggie smiled sadly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Then a sound split the air. a war cry sharp and piercing echoing off the canyon walls. The Apache had arrived. They came fast like a storm breaking open. Arrows thudded into the dirt. Bullets cracked from the other side. Chaos tore across the open plain as the two forces clashed in a fury of dust and fire. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the sky turned thick with smoke and fear. Maggie ducked behind a trough, firing at the riders trying to circle her ranch. She didn't know who was aiming at her and who wasn't. All she knew was the baby's cry rising above it all, cutting through the madness like a prayer. The sheriff tried to wave the townsmen back, shouting for order, but Clyde had lost all sense. He charged forward with his rifle raised, screaming Maggie's name. She fired once, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, and Clyde fell hard into the dirt, his torch rolling from his hand. The Apache chief, Narlin's brother, saw it all. He spurred his horse toward her, riding through the dust until he was close enough to see the terror in her eyes. For a moment, time froze. The two of them, the widow and the warrior, locked eyes across the chaos. He saw the child pressed to her chest, her tiny hands reaching toward him unafraid. Maggie lowered her gun. "Take her," she shouted over the din. "Take her and go." He hesitated. Bullets cracked past him. Smoke burned the sky. And in that instant he understood. The white woman had not stolen his sister's blood. She had protected it. He dismounted, moving through the hail of gunfire like a shadow. When he reached Maggie, she held the baby out, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "Her name's Chenoa," she whispered. "Don't let them kill her for being born." The warrior nodded, his expression fierce and solemn. He took the child carefully, holding her close as if she were light itself. Then he turned to go, but Maggie didn't follow. "Maggie!" the sheriff yelled, riding toward her through the chaos. "Get down!" Too late. A stray bullet caught her in the side, spinning her backward. She hit the porch hard, gasping as blood spread across her dress like spilled wine. Through blurred vision, she saw the Apache fade into the dust. The baby's cry carried with them, softer, smaller, until it was gone. The gunfire died slowly after that. The men of Dry Creek, battered and broken, began to fall back. The sheriff knelt beside her, his face pale beneath the smoke. "Maggie," he said, voice shaking, "why'd you do it?" She smiled faintly, her hand pressing to the wound. "Because somebody had to." Her eyes turned toward the ridge, where the sun burned through the haze and the Apache riders vanished into the light. And with a final breath, Maggie Callahan closed her eyes, not in fear but in peace. The land went quiet again. The war was over, for now. The smoke had settled by noon. Dry Creek lay quiet, its people hollow-eyed, standing in the wreckage of what they'd done. The desert wind moved slow across the fields, carrying the smell of gunpowder and regret. Sheriff Harlan stood beside Maggie Callahan's porch, hat in hand, staring down at the blood-stained boards. The rifle she'd used leaned against the railing, still warm in the sun. The woman who'd stood her ground, who'd fought for something bigger than herself, now lay wrapped in a simple blanket. No preacher, no ceremony, just silence. He knelt and brushed the dust from her face. "You deserved better," he murmured. "This whole damn town did you wrong." Behind him, a few of the men from Dry Creek gathered, the same ones who had ridden out that morning full of hate and fear. None of them could look him in the eye. "Sheriff," one of them muttered, voice breaking, "we didn't mean for it to go like this." Harlan turned slowly, his gaze cutting through them like a knife. "You burned her porch. You fired first. Don't tell me what you meant." Clyde Horton's brother stepped forward, grief etched deep in his face. "She shot Clyde. What was she supposed to do?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "She did what any decent soul would have done. She protected a child." No one answered. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had been. Harlan straightened and looked toward the western ridge. The Apache were gone. No sign of them remained. No riders, no tracks, no smoke trails, just the endless desert swallowing the horizon. But as he stared, something glimmered at the edge of sight. He walked down the trail, boots crunching over the scorched earth, until he reached the canyon mouth. There, by the grave Maggie had dug days before, something new stood in the dirt. A small pile of river stones stacked carefully, one atop the other. On top of it lay a single white feather. Harlan knelt. He didn't need to understand the language to know what it meant. Mercy, honor, a promise kept. He bowed his head and whispered, "They came back." That night, when he rode back into town, he didn't tell anyone what he'd found. He just gathered a few of the women, the same ones who used to whisper behind Maggie's back, and asked them to ride with him come morning. By dawn, they were out at her ranch, repairing what had been destroyed, hammering new boards, sweeping away ashes, setting a marker at the edge of the porch that read simply, "Maggie Callahan, she stood alone." Weeks passed, and the story spread. Travelers stopped by the ranch to ask about the widow who'd stood between a child and two warring worlds. The townsfolk, ashamed, began to tell her tale softer, more reverent, as though speaking of a saint. Sheriff Harlan sometimes rode to the canyon at dusk. Every time he came, he found something new at that grave, a token of thanks. A woven bracelet, a carved stone, once a small wooden rattle painted with Apache symbols of peace. Each time, he left a fresh flower, and though no one ever saw the Apache again, sometimes, when the wind rolled through Dry Creek, it carried a faint sound, like the soft cry of a baby and the voice of a woman whispering, a lullaby across the desert. It was said that even the hardest men in town would pause when they heard it because they remembered the widow who chose compassion over survival. And they knew deep down that her courage had changed them all. Years passed. The land healed, but it never forgot. The Callahan Ranch still stood at the edge of the desert, its windmill creaking against the endless Arizona sky. Grass had grown where the ashes once lay. A few wildflowers bloomed along the fence line, pale yellow and white, the kind that only grow where storms have passed. No one lived there anymore. But folks from Dry Creek still rode out sometimes, just to stand on that porch. They'd touch the old marker carved with Maggie's name and leave small offerings, a coin, a scrap of ribbon, a child's toy. Nobody said much while they were there. You didn't need to. The story had become part of the land. They said the widow had faced down hate and violence with nothing but a mother's heart and a steady hand. They said she'd stood between two worlds when no one else would. And some nights when the moon hung low over the canyon, travelers swore they saw a lone figure standing by the fence, a woman in a plain dress, hair loose in the wind, watching the horizon as if waiting for someone to come home. No one dared disturb her. They just tipped their hats and rode on, letting the legend rest. Stories like Maggie Callahan's remind us that courage isn't always about drawing a gun. Sometimes it's about standing your ground when every voice tells you to kneel. She wasn't a hero because she fought. She was a hero because she chose mercy in a world built on vengeance. In the Old West, justice was often written with bullets, but Maggie wrote hers with compassion, and it cost her everything. Yet her choice outlived every man who judged her. It reshaped a town, softened hearts, and turned her name into something more than a tombstone on a lonely ranch. Maybe that's why her story still echoes, because deep down, we all want to believe there's still a Maggie Callahan somewhere out there, someone willing to stand alone in the face of hate and say, "Not this time." And if we're lucky, maybe that kind of courage isn't gone at all. Maybe it's just waiting, in the quiet corners of this country, for the next person brave enough to pick it up. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable tales from me. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Thanks for watching.